Geneal Cochran was born to Gertrude Lewis and Arvil Alexander Cochran on May 31st, 1931. She entered the world in the old John Buck place down near the banks of McGee's Creek in the very small community of Darbin, located in the rich farm belt of southern Mississippi. Geneal was the fourth child of what would eventually include 7 children, 3 brothers, 3 sisters. Her unusual name was found by her mother in a church magazine, but she was affectionately known as Neil. She lived in the Buck place during her early years, recalling later that the cracks between the logs let the cold wind blow through the room. There was no electricity or inside plumbing, and thus the family toted water from a spring down the hill and used an outhouse. Family grew everything they ate. It was a difficult start to life. Geneal's paternal grandfather died when her father was 15. Arvil worked hard to help his mother, Matilda, with the Cochran family farm, and in the early 1930s, Arvil's mother needed his help again, and so Arvil and Gertrude moved their young family back into the Cochran home. Grandma Matilda dipped snuff, the act of putting a small amount of tobacco between the lower lip and the gum. At 2 years old, Geneal and her older brother Neldon were curious and decided to try their own version. They mixed the cocoa and sugar, placing the tasty concoction in their bottom lip like Grandma. Unfortunately for them, their mother came into the kitchen and saw the mess. The 2 kids took off running. Neldon encouraged little Neil that she could outrun her. Gertrude had time to stop, get a switch, and still catch the 2 before they reached the road. That punishment was the most severe that Geneal could recall. When Geneal was born, the country was in the midst of a Great Depression. She was about 2 years old when Arvil and Gertrude made the decision to move over 1,500 miles to Mesa, Arizona, where Arvil's sister, Malvina, had recently settled. They sold their farm to Arvil's brother, Brigham, and in turn he gave them a 1929 Chevy in part payment. They repainted it a beautiful black and drove across the country, arriving Mesa in late December. Geneal's mother remembered that it was the most beautiful Christmas that she had ever seen. The reason for the move was twofold: to find employment in difficult economic times, and more important, to seal their young family in the new Mesa Temple. Within 2 months, February 16, 1933, the sealing was accomplished. Arvil found work tending to cotton fields and orange groves for a counselor in the temple presidency, President LeSueur. He earned $7.50 a week and was allowed to milk the LeSueur cow in the evening to add to their food needs. They were in Arizona less than a year before Grandma Matilda Cochran needed Arvil's help again. They returned to Darbin and moved locally a couple of times, selling their car for land before settling at the old Bam Lee place, where the family expanded and lived for about 7 years. Geneal learned to work on the farm at a young age. When she was about 4 years old, she helped prepare the fields. Neldon would guide the plow while Geneal handled the reins. She picked cotton, peanuts, and wild berries, milked cows, gathered eggs, shucked corn, and ground into meal. They made their own butter, syrup, and grew watermelon and cantaloupe. But not all was work. After completing chores one day, Neldon and his friends decided to go swimming in the nearby creek. Geneal wanted to join the fun and followed them. Neldon, who held his hoe as a weapon, kept chopping at her foot, saying, "Don't come any closer, I'll cut you off your toes." Neil, not one to back down, moved forward. For years she would show the scar on her foot. What she said that she didn't know at the time was that the boys had no suits, and their plan was to skinny dip at the creek. A fun game she described was when they found a package in the road that fell off a wagon. They dressed up the package and tied a string to it. They placed it in the road near a bridge and hid underneath. They were delighted when other poor country folk came by to try to pick up the package, only to have it pulled before they could grab. She said it was when the package moved. She said that when the package moved, the people would cry out, "Y'all got me, y'all got me." She played in the woods almost every day, and it was there that she learned to enjoy and appreciate God's handiwork. She also enjoyed jump rope, jump board, and later a makeshift basketball goal at the farm. She loved to play with the other kids in the country, especially those that could run fast. Geneal's father, in addition to the hard farm work, drove the community school bus. Geneal remembers tending her little brother Billy on the floor of that bus while her father picked up and dropped off students. Soon Geneal herself was able to attend the Buford School. She really enjoyed it, looking forward to each year. Her first teacher was a male and also the principal and her track coach, and he frightened her. Geneal's parents wanted better schooling for their kids, and so in 1943 they moved to the big city of Columbia, into a duplex on Dewey Street. Cochrans lived in one half, and Geneal's maternal grandmother, Mama Lewis, lived in the other. In responding to why they moved, Geneal said, "I almost flunked geography." She actually got a D and had always been an A student. The time came for her to graduate from grammar school. She was chosen to be the speaker at graduation, but they requested that she wear a white dress. Geneal did not have a white dress, and she was very well aware that her parents could not afford to buy one. Gertrude and Ozma heard of a radio station that sold items. On that day, they advertised a white dress, Geneal's size, that fit in the family budget. She then knew she was supposed to be the one to speak at graduation. Geneal thrived at Columbia High School, despite being one of just a few Mormons in the entire school. She was on the Y-Teen Club and its cabinet, yearbook staff, Future Homemakers of America, Girls Athletic Association, Glee Club, Who's Who, basketball team, music club, track, vice president of junior class, vice president of the senior class, and homeroom secretary. So it was no surprise to anyone in her senior year when she was voted most versatile and selected to give the valedictorian address at graduation. While in high school, Geneal worked odd jobs, including as a clerk at the local 5 and dime store, painted photos at the PDQ studio, and worked at Gray's Creamery, an ice cream shop. During her senior year, she attended a church-sponsored Gold and Green Ball. The mission president at the time decided that a traveling missionary band was just what was needed for the few members in the South. He had the missionaries that played instruments send for them. They performed across the southern states, mission, and came to Columbia, where the Cochran family attended. The next stop was Mobile, Alabama, so Geneal, her sister, and aunt drove the 100 miles to attend the Mobile Ball. It was here that Geneal first met her future husband, Glenn Cahoon, who was attending training for the Air National Guard in Biloxi, Mississippi. He and his LDS friend drove the 60 miles to attend the church dance. Glenn remembers their first meeting. "I never was much at dancing and stayed on the sidelines. Then it happened. Now I've gone with a lot of girls in my life and even believed that I was in love. But in that small culture hall in Mobile, Alabama, I heard the Tabernacle Choir sing the Hallelujah Chorus when that beautiful, vivacious girl floated into the room, dressed as an angel. I finally knew what real love was all about." Geneal Cochran. They dated on the weekends for about 9 months, attending dances, swimming at the old mill pond, midnight swimming in the old quarry with water moccasins, roller skating, boat trip to Deer Island, picnicking all over the country, including the Red Bluff and on the beaches of Biloxi. Glenn graduated and returned to Salt Lake City and then to Illinois for a 4-month class, and was then called on a mission to go back to the southern states. According to Glenn's mother, Glenn would take Geneal's photo with him to the dinner table and just stare at it. After Geneal graduated, she worked as an operator at the telephone company and was briefly engaged to be married. She said that she had a great desire to find a mate that believed in the gospel of Jesus Christ and one that could take her to the house of the Lord. She noted that there were no such men around the area she lived. The engagement was called off, and Geneal was called to serve a mission in the southern states and was stationed in Alabama and Florida. Geneal told her friends that the missionaries in her branch could not attend her farewell as they had to leave to pick up Glenn at the bus or train station as he arrived to serve his mission. While they were on their missions, Geneal saw Glenn at a couple of mission conferences, and they rode each other while Glenn finished his mission. After a mission, Geneal and her sister Ozma moved to Salt Lake City. They stayed with Glenn's parents and then found an apartment. Glenn returned home from his mission late May and asked Geneal for a date and to speak at his homecoming. A good friend and roommate, Thera Lou, remembered. The day of their date, we gals spent at the movie. Your mother had put up her hair in pink curls and let her hair dry while we were at the movie. She wanted to look just right when she met your dad. But right after we exited the theater, she met your dad on the street. She was so embarrassed, but your dad was so enamored with your mom that he paid no attention to her hair. Apparently, Glenn remembered her hair, as he recalled on that day. On the 31st, I was shopping downtown and ran into her. She had her hair up in curlers. She didn't stop to talk too much. The dating continued. Glenn was concerned that he might lose Geneal. So he recalled, I picked out rings and figured that the 4th of July was the day. We went out to Lagoon on the 3rd and danced. She wanted to know what that hard thing was in my pocket. When we got to her apartment, I asked her if she would be the mother of my children. She never replied, but she never gave the ring back either. Within 2 months, they were sealed by Elder Matthew Cowley in the Salt Lake City Temple on August 22nd. The day after they returned home from their honeymoon, the newlyweds went out to Glenn's parents' farm located at 7800 South and 3000 East, which is now where they are and will be buried. Glenn remembered it was 1.5 acres, and they grew everything there, including largest peaches he had ever seen. Their life was a little upset with Glenn taking the job as a police officer. He was placed on graveyard shift with Geneal still on days at the phone company. They didn't see a lot of each other, but they saw just enough because Geneal got pregnant right away. They stayed at the 2nd Avenue apartment for about 3 months, and then it was decided that Geneal would return to Mississippi to have the baby. They moved into Glenn's parents' basement until she left for Mississippi about 2 months later. While she was gone, Glenn was very lonely, and he felt bad about letting her go. As he was going on to graveyard shift the 7th of May, his parents came down to the police station and told him that he was a father of a son. He was happy, but said he didn't feel any different. Glenn's sister lived at 748 Emerson. She told him that the house next to hers was up for sale. He looked at it and felt that with some scraping, they could afford it. He made arrangements and got the financing, and when Geneal and Bob returned home, he showed them. With Geneal's blessing, they closed on it and moved into 744 Emerson Avenue in July 1953. They had a small end table and a small lamp, their wedding gifts, and scrambled to find the other necessities. Geneal worked hard cleaning the house, and made it livable. Glenn's police work kept him from participating fully in church, but Geneal was always very active. After Bob was born, she thought that she was pregnant again, and they went on that assumption until the doctor said that he felt there were other problems. They operated and found a cyst the size of a softball on her ovaries. There was a great fear that we wouldn't have any more children, but that proved to be wrong. Geneal and Glenn would go on to have 5 children, 3 boys and then 2 girls. She expressed her feelings in a tribute to her kids. My family was my life. Everything I did with them in mind. She lived that way too. Since she was the only member of her family in Salt Lake, she found a substitute in Wilford and Ruth Kimball and Virginia Kimball Johnson. They became her second family and were very close. The young marrieds group that evolved into the mutual marrieds also became her family away from home. The next 40 years, they were a couple, and you rarely heard the name of Geneal without Glenn. She learned to decorate cakes with Bob's first birthday cake. From then on, she produced hundreds of professionally decorated cakes, birthday, wedding, anniversary, or just the special occasion cake. There are few people in her immediate family or extended family that did not have a Geneal wedding cake. Because of her adopted mother, Ruth, she also spent a lot of time producing some of the most beautiful ceramics in the Kimball basement, and later with her own molds and kiln teaching grandchildren and others. And to her list of titles, nursemaid and therapist. When Glenn was in a tragic scooter accident, he recalled, the doctors came in and said that he had to rebuild my wrist, my hip, and I had so many fractures that there wasn't any other way than to replace it. He said that I probably wouldn't walk again, and if I did, it would be with crutches or even a cane. It was devastating news, but somehow I knew that his prediction would not come true. And this was verified when President Wilford Kimball came to the hospital and gave me a blessing. And in that blessing, he promised me that through my faithfulness that I would walk and run again. I'm so thankful for that blessing. There was even a greater blessing, my wife. She was at the hospital and by my side every waking moment. She took care of me and did all those things that I couldn't do for myself. There were the physical needs, such as eating, scratching, and wiping me, but much greater were my emotional needs. My mind was going 1,000 miles per hour, thinking of how I was going to support a family as a cripple. What about my active life? I like doing things. Is all that behind me? She was always there, and when the slightest amount of discouragement came in, she was there to dispel it and replace it with rays of sunshine. I was in the cast for 6 months on my back, and if it hadn't been for my family, it would have been impossible to bear. The young married snuck down into the Cahoon fruit room, gathered up all the empty bottles, and later brought them back filled with fruit. What she learned from Glenn's scooter accident was helpful when 10 years later her oldest son had a paralyzing ski accident. She was always there for her family. Geneal taught her family by example. I remember one day when she asked me to buy a loaf of bread, at Franny's grocery store, located just west of this building. Franny, a neighbor across the street, was extremely challenged physically, and it was all he could do to keep his small store running. I told my mother I could buy 3 loaves of bread for the same amount of money at the nearby Safeway. Penny-pitching policeman's wife replied, "Please buy the loaf of bread from Franny." She didn't have to say anything else. Geneal loved to sing and could play certain songs on the piano up until just a couple of years ago. Remember Geneal trying to outrun her mother after the snuff incident? I had a similar experience when I was younger. I was about 10 and had been accused of something. I'm positive that it was Bob or Don that did something and put the blame on me again. Anyway, I took off running out the front door and up the street. I got to the Farley home before the track star caught me. No switch, but I never tried to run from her again. She listed cooking as a hobby, but anyone that had an opportunity to taste her creations knew it was much more than a hobby. Sewing was the same way. She could and did sew just about anything one could imagine, from teddy bears to prom dresses. She worked very hard to make the policeman's salary stretch. After her kids were all in school, and to stay close to them, she went to work at the elementary school in the office. She later spent long days as an ice cream cake decorator at Baskin-Robbins. All of her kids, except for Bob, worked there also. They used the excuse they were teaching their children to work when they started their own catering business. She had said it was actually to help people. Anyone can guess the bulk of the work landed on in this family business. Many of their kids were just starting out in their careers, and the extra cash was a great help. My guess is that they barely paid for the food supplies and gave most, if not all, of their profits to their children. They did the same way with the night cleaning of office buildings and later with the car wash. We all did it as a family, and it was another opportunity to spend time together. She used her work ethics at the property in the mountains. She loved spending time there, making all the improvements that made it a place that she could gather her family. All of her children and most of her grandchildren have fond memories of working and playing at the property. She also followed in her mother's footsteps in searching for history of her family, and it became clear that the family history was dependent on technology. Geneal spent many tiresome hours learning how to use the computer to further her search. She was also a gospel scholar in her own right. A very close friend of hers remembers, "She knew how much Geneal taught me. She knew so much about the gospel and taught me more than I had been taught in primary, Sunday school, and mutual." Geneal's example inspired her friend to serve an LDS mission. Geneal's home was always open for anyone to stay, whether passing through or staying for a while. I know many of you stayed there. We gave up trying to add up all the cousins and other relatives that called the Cahoon home for a time. On one occasion, some members of the church came from down south to Salt Lake City for LDS conference and stayed at the Cahoon home for a week, since both Geneal and Glenn served and lived down there. The one thought the other knew who they were. After the visitors left, it was discovered that neither of them knew them. It might be thought that Geneal, the wife of a scoutmaster, young men's president, high counselor, bishop twice, stake president, political candidate, longtime police officer, might take a back seat to her husband. But that really never happened. The truth is the success of Glenn depended directly on Geneal. She also had a great sense of humor and was almost always a good sport. She spent all her life in church service, including the LDS primary, Cub Scouts, basketball coach, as ward and stake release society president, which she felt was her most challenging calling. She also spent almost 10 years as an ordinance worker in both the Salt Lake and Jordan River Temple. She loved serving in the temple, and it was a great help through the difficult times after Glenn passed. Glenn's passing was difficult, and like most widows, she had no idea how she was going to survive. But she made it 25 years, and it helped that she came from a long line of strong surviving women. Her mother spent 31 years as a widow. Her paternal grandmother topped that at 33 years. But it was her maternal grandmother who had 10 children, survived widowhood for 47 years. Geneal knew how to survive and continue to make a meaningful contribution all of her years. She lived that last 9 years with Alzheimer's disease. She was pretty good at disguising it, but she never let it define her. Her life was so focused on service, and because of that, she felt that she actually worked at the memory care center that she lived, and was always trying to help the residents. Bedridden and barely hanging on to life, but always concerned for others, she recently wanted to assist those roommates that would cry out for help. Mom, you have fought the good fight and are a living testimony to God's goodness. Thank you for your great example. Yeah.